right? It's not this thing that is often talked about but has never been done. We know what it's like. We know what it's like to go through the college football playoffs and make it to the national championship game. And we understand the challenges that it presents. So you're not talking about something that's never been done, right? Now, we haven't won it, and that's our job.
Hello and welcome. It is always college football, and we appreciate you being here. It's the end of May. It's the 29th, and we are so glad that you're here to join us talking a little college football during kind of a slow time of the year. And helping us kind of fill this slow time, we've had some great conversations with some of the biggest names in college football. And today we'll be joined by one of my favorites, the head coach of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, Marcus Freeman. We'll ask him about his team, the quarterback competition, what he learned from last year's playoff run that culminated in a national championship berth, and then, of course, the hot topic of the day in college football, the SC and the Notre Dame rivalry. Where does he stand on its continued life? Then we're going to talk a little bit about what's transpired here over the last 7 to 10 days in college football. The playoff has adopted a new seeding format. Excited to kind of break that down and why it's a positive for where we're going here in this upcoming year. And then there are some things going on right now about what the playoff future might look like. Looking likely that we're going to land at 16 teams. But what does the format of those 16 teams look like? Will they go with an automatic qualifier format where the SEC and the Big Ten each get at least 4 teams in? The Big 12 and the ACC get at least 2 teams in, which leaves you the G5 champion and just a couple at-larges. Or will they go with a newly proposed format of 5 automatic qualifiers plus 11 at-large bids, one that's been kind of floating? And I'll tell you the key point that's kind of being dug in on, especially amongst the SEC, as to why they prefer the 5 plus 11 model as opposed to the automatic qualifier. It's going to be fascinating. It could get contentious between the SEC and the Big Ten here in the foreseeable future. So let's kick things off with a great discussion today with Marcus Freeman. Well, he's one of my favorite personalities in the sport, and I think everyone is now starting to pay attention to just how good he is at getting his team ready to play and accomplishing big things there in South Bend, Indiana. He's Marcus Freeman. Coach, last year was a remarkable year, and I think more than anything else, the adversity that your team overcame with injuries throughout the regular season and how well they played in the postseason speaks a lot about your culture. So how have you tried to build off of that heading into this season?
Well, I think the major thing is that you build off the lessons that you learn. Right? I often say your past experiences are the foundation for your future, and I think our guys understand now what it takes, what it's like. It won't be foreign to them as you continue to get in the season. You play in these big games, but every year is different, right? You got a collective group of different personnel and some new coaches that you got to build this team to reach its full potential. But the experience of the last year has now created a new foundation for this team's 25 season.
Is there a different belief now? Because I mean, for a long time, we all know what the conversation was around Notre Dame in the postseason and the shortcomings that they experienced throughout the BCS era. It just feels like that's just such a dated conversation now because of last year. But is it one of those things where I knew you internally always believed that you can do it, but actually seeing the fruits of your labor had to have paid significant dividends last year? So are you sensing a different belief and maybe a different ceiling for your team in the future as a result of what you accomplished?
Yeah, I don't think the ceiling's any different. I think there's a internal belief that our job is to reach that ceiling that we have. But now it's the understanding that, hell, we can do it, right? It's not this thing that is often talked about but has never been done. We know what it's like. We know what it's like to go through the college football playoffs and make it to the national championship game. And we understand the challenges that it presents. So you're not talking about something that's never been done. right? Now we haven't won it, and that's our job, right? Is to find a way to go through this college football season and go through the playoffs, and at the end of the day, be the one team standing there on the top of the mountain. We haven't done that, but we understand now because of our experiences what it takes to get there.
Has the result of playing the amount of games you played last year, has it at all altered how you prepare your team to enter the season? Maybe changed the way you practice in the fall, maybe it changed your summer conditioning program. Because of that experience, you're one of two teams that was able to do it. Have you adjusted maybe the way you lead into the season, just knowing how long that season is?
Well, I think it's a reminder of the depth that you need, right? I think you can't ooze into this season, especially with the schedule we have. We have Miami, the University of Miami, Florida, that very first game, and we got to be ready to go. Now, how you structure your summer conditioning, how you structure your training camp, to me, is always being adaptable. How do we find healthier ways to do things, but also make sure we're prepared? I think as we look back at last year, it was probably the healthiest in terms of practice injuries that we've had since I've been the head coach, but also we practice probably 14 to 15% more than we ever have. And so we're always looking for ways as a sports performance staff to look at evaluating how we practice, how we train, to make sure we're ready to go, but also to prevent as many preventable injuries as we can.
Yeah, it's such a difficult balance because the only way to avoid injuries on game day is to practice hard, I feel like. But then again, we see guys all the time, or all teams all the time, losing guys in practice because of how intense those practices can become. So I know it's a delicate balancing act. You referenced Miami in week one. Your team has long played a big time opponent early in the year, whether it was in Dublin a couple years ago or what we saw last year against A&M. Now with Miami coming up this year, how does having that team in week one increase the urgency of fall camp and maybe have you ready to play a little bit better earlier in the year?
You never want your team to prepare a different way because of the opponent, right? And so I don't love that analogy of, hey, you got a big time opponent, you're going to prepare a different way, but it's what does your team need? We're going to have whoever's our starting quarterback is going to be his first game starting. So as I look at this training campus, how many high pressure situations can we put these quarterbacks in to make sure they can execute before we get out there and down in South Florida? And so I think for me, it's looking at what does your team need? Not the opponent as much as what your current team needs to make sure they're prepared and have some of those questions answered before the real bullets get flying.
You referenced the quarterback. Since you brought it up, I guess I'm contracted to ask you about it. You saw one leave in Steve Angeli, who I think the world of. I think he was a gamer. He gave you guys a spark against Penn State. I have the utmost respect for him and wish him the best with the rest of his career at Syracuse. But that means there's two guys left in the battle, three if you want to go deep down the depth chart a little bit. And I love the upside of all three. But how would you assess where that quarterback battle is today at the end of May?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what you said about Steve, man. Huge fan. Forever grateful for what he gave to this program, got his degree, and he's going to go on and do great things at Syracuse, and I'll be rooting for him hard. You know, we have two guys that we're really battling with Steve in the spring with CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey, and both did some really good things, right? Both, as you evaluate the quarterback position, have an extremely high ceiling. They both do things really, really well, and they do them differently. Our job is to say who's going to give us the best chance to win as we get ready to face an opponent. And those questions will be answered by the quarterbacks during fall camp. And I love it because I love competition. Right now you can add a little bit of pressure through competition to see who can perform under those high pressure situations. So I think they're both capable of being the starting quarterback at Notre Dame, or they wouldn't be in this quarterback battle. But I'm looking forward to an extremely challenging and high pressure fall camp.
I would imagine. So I think what's interesting, though, is that the two guys have a different skill set. So I could, knowing what you guys evolved into last year with how often you use Riley Leonard's legs on goal line situations, on short yardage situations, my quarterback brain is thinking, well, I could see Kenny having a role, even if CJ is the starting quarterback, I could see Kenny having a role in short yard situations. So have you, as a defensive minded head coach, thought about the possibilities of a 2 quarterback system maybe early in the year for certain situations that might be presented to your offense?
Absolutely. You're going to look for any way to help your team win. And if that means you use 2 quarterbacks for certain situations, then you're going to find a way to use 2 quarterbacks. That might be 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time. Who knows? It's just creativity is so important. And we have some creative football coaches and players here that will come up with the right plan. You're going to you're going to have one starter, right? You're going to have one guy that's going to be your quarterback. But I can see us using both quarterbacks to find a way to help us win.
Yeah, and they're all going to be complemented by a tremendous core of running backs, and I'm going to get to them in a minute. Before we do, I do want to ask about Mike Denbrock, and I don't think, as far as personalities, the guy's off the charts good. I just love being around him. I love his positivity, and I love his energy. But I do feel like in year one, sometimes it's kind of a process of trial and error to kind of figure out who you are. Now that you're in year number 2 with him running the offense, how much further along is the install? How much further along is the grasp for the rest of the offense outside of the new quarterback when implementing some of the philosophies that he wants to implement?
I think year 2, I think there's some familiarity with the current players that were here last year. I think as you look at last year, the biggest change was how do we tailor what our offensive playbook looks like to do what our quarterback can perform well.
Yeah.
Like, that's so important. You have to call what your players can execute well, and it starts with the quarterback. And that's what I saw the biggest growth with the relationship between Mike Denbrock and Riley Leonard. As you know, Riley didn't have spring, right? So we could teach Riley all these different things, but at the end of the day, we had fall camp to evaluate in the first game, right? And so what we had to do is go through those growing pains. Okay, how do we tailor this system to what they do well? Well, both quarterbacks that we have fighting for this starting quarterback position have been here for a year with Mike Denbrock. They understand the system and the playbook. Now, as you determine who's going to be the starter and the guy, you're going to have to call things that they do well. And so I think any great coach, man, understands that. Like, it's not about what you know, it's what they can perform well.
It does feel like whoever is the starter, you got a great offensive play caller. And we know we have great running attack. I feel like the receivers are improving. We'll get to them in a moment. But I do feel like that core of the offensive line, we saw guys leave that were starters for y'all that couldn't be guaranteed a starting spot, that decided to go elsewhere and kind of take the bird in the hand, which to me indicates not that you're maybe slightly more thin than you were a year ago, but at the same time, the quality of the personnel that you have up front has to be a significant advantage. So how do you feel right now about the 5 guys that will be protecting your new quarterback?
There's a lot of confidence, right? And the 5 guys that would be starting right now all have started multiple games for us here at Notre Dame, and again, high ceiling guys. And you know what? I feel confident about the depth of our offensive line. Maybe they don't have a lot of in-game experience, but the talent and the ceiling of those guys are extremely high. And so now it's about getting those 5 to gel together. As I said, they've all started games, but they haven't 5 started multiple games together. And how do we make sure they can gel together as an offensive line? But it all starts with the big guys up front, and the confidence level is extremely high with them.
That's a great starting point. And I know the confidence level, I don't know if it can get much higher than what you have in your running back room. I think you have 2 of the top 15 backs in college football. And I think, even the depth beyond those 2 is outstanding, especially situationally. So how do you as a coach keep everybody happy in terms of touches? Because let's be real, if you give the ball to Jeremiah 30 times a game, that's pretty good. But it's probably not best for the long-term health for Jeremiah and the team if you want to play in 15 games next year. So how do you balance the touches and making sure that you kind of keep everybody happy and keep everybody fresh?
Yeah, I think it's one of the ultimate challenges of a coach, right? Is that your job can't be to keep everybody happy. We understand that your job is to do what's best to help us win, but your role, whatever it's defined to be, is so critical to helping us achieve this victory. And so we have to, more importantly than to keep everybody happy, we have to get every person and every player in this football program committed to team glory, committed to that joy that we achieve when you're able to win a football game. And your role, whatever it is determined for that week, is so critical for us to achieve that feeling of team glory. And so that to me is the challenge more than anything, is to say, okay, how can not keep him happy, but how can we make sure this guy knows that your role is so critical for us to achieve this ultimate goal of team glory, which is more important than anybody, right? More important than any person, more important than any role. Team glory is what we want to achieve. And so that's the challenge. How we spread it out will be determined each week. It's a great problem to have multiple different weapons that you got to find ways to get the ball in their hands. And that might be putting two running backs on the field at the same time. That might be using certain guys in different positions. That's the fun part about the tactical aspect of the college football.
So we've referenced two quarterbacks on the field at the same time, two running backs on the field at the same time. I don't even know what personnel grouping that is, but I like it. You know what I mean? You're going to get creative this year, I'm sensing.
Hey, listen, those wideouts won't be too happy if we have two quarterbacks and two running backs. We got to keep the wideouts a little bit more involved in that.
Well, and it'd be easy to do that with the progress that we saw from Jaden Greathouse down the stretch last year. I think it's still lacrosse season. I haven't checked where Notre Dame's lacrosse schedule is right now, but I know Faison will be back with y'all at some point. He had a really nice season last year. But I want to ask you kind of about the two new additions. Well, not necessarily the two transfer additions that I'm really excited about. Malachi Fields being the big one, no pun intended. But having that big body receiver and more depth at the receiver room and more versatility at the receiver room gives you a lot of options. So how do you feel about the growth at that position?
I'll start off with some of the guys that are returning with Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison. Some of those guys, man, they've just continuously improved, right? And I think what you see out of those guys is that there's a belief, if they're covered one-on-one, I don't know if they're covered. Give them a chance to make a play, and that's what you saw out of them last year. But you know what I really respect the most out of Will was here for spring. The way he practiced, I got a lot of respect for him. The effort he gave, the pride he took in blocking, the pride he took in doing things when he didn't have the ball in his hands, to me speaks volumes about him. He's a productive guy. He's going to find a way to win, find a way to get open. But you know as well as I know, the wideout position, you won't always determine if the ball's going to be in your hands. And the things he does without the ball in his hands, I love. And I'll say that in the same realm that what I really like about Malachi Fields when I watch film is, if he's one-on-one, he's going to be expected to make the play. We expect him to win versus man coverage. But what I've seen him do and how they've utilized, the previous school utilized him in ways to put him at the point of contact a lot of times. It shows me that the guy takes a lot of pride in blocking and doing things without the ball in his hands. And so I'm excited for them. He's a high school quarterback, a former high school quarterback, so maybe we can find some unique ways to maybe have three quarterbacks on the field at once.
Perfect. Hey, why not? Throw that extra wrinkle out there. And hey, quarterbacks, coach, I will admit, best hands on the team. If you don't believe us, just ask. I think we all would agree with that. New personnel defensively, but really the biggest key is losing Al Golden, who I think is just an amazing presence. And I think college football will miss him. I'm excited about his opportunity. But you bring in Chris Ash, who I think in some ways kind of follows a similar path. He's coached high-level college football. He's had a lot of time in the NFL. He now comes back, and I think we'll probably try to just keep doing what's been done because it's been so good over the last couple of years. How does his philosophy differ from what you've run the last few years with Coach Golden?
Well, I think every leader, every coordinator has to put their own personal touch on them, right? Touch on what their coordinator and leading. And he will, and he has. At the end of the day, he's going to be himself. But there's only a certain amount of ways to play defensive football, right? And I was talking to one of our former players who's in the NFL, and he's on his fifth coordinator in the last 7 years. I said, listen, man, you've known so much football. There's only a certain amount of ways to play defense. And it's the same thing with Coach Ash. We have a pretty good foundation built here in terms of what our guys believe and is important in defensive football. We'll change up a little bit of tactical things and how we execute them. But to me, the fundamentals of playing defensive football, the gap sound, the ability to be aggressive. Are you going to play man? Are you going to play zone? How do you want to play? All those things are every year you find ways to tweak and change. But, the core fundamentals of successful defensive play won't change.
Looking at the personnel, I love your corner tandem. That's to be expected. Who would have thought Leonard Moore would have the year he had last year? He proved over the course of the last 6-7 games as good as anybody at the position in the entire country, along with Christian Gray. But I do want to ask you about the addition of Devontae Smith, who was one of my favorite players on the Alabama roster last year. That dude's tough as nails. He played hurt most of last year. People don't even know that, but he battled, man. So I feel like have three guys that can play corner if you want them to, but they also have some position versatility as well. So how do you feel right now about your secondary?
Extremely confident, right? I think you have two, as you mentioned, two returning starters at the corner position. Devontae's a guy that I knew from when I was a defense coordinator at Cincinnati. Devontae's from Cincinnati, went on Alabama, as you know. But when he got into the portal, he was a guy that we had a familiar relationship and was able to get him here. And he's an athletic, tough, very instinctual football player. And we're glad to have him. At the safety position, Don Schuler returns, and then so we'll have a battle to who's going to be the other starting safety, and that's kind of fun, right? Like let's have a battle. I've just mentioned four guys that we think are going to be the starters. Now, who's this other safety, and we're going to have a battle with a couple of different guys. I don't even want to rattle them off. We'll have a couple of different guys in there, but we're very confident in terms of our secondary play.
And then I know you feel great about some of the guys up front. With Botello back, with Traore back, who we lost, early in the season last year. I think people have forgotten how much juice you might have had off the edge had you just stayed healthy at defensive end last year. But it feels like the defensive line, I know it's going to be brutal to have to replace Howard Cross and Riley Mills, but you already had to play the last couple games without Riley Mills. You missed a month with Howard Cross. So it feels like those guys are well positioned to take on an increased role. So collectively, is it fair to assume that the defensive line might actually have a little more juice than they had a year ago?
It's hard to juice. I hope they have a little more juice. It's going to be hard to replace two productive defensive tackles in Howard Cross and Riley Mills, two guys that are extremely good football players and do great things at the next level. Now, we're going to have to replace that production with multiple guys. And that's where I feel like we have a lot of depth and we've had three guys that have played here with Donnie Heinisch and Gabe Rubio and Jason Onye. But then you add two transfers, and who's going to be those other guys that we continuously roll in there to replace that production? You're not going to replace that production with two guys. Now, at the end position, we're pretty deep. You talk about you're going to be returning two guys with Boubacar and Botello off of injury, right? They haven't had spring ball, and they'll be ready for the fall. But you have three returning starters between Junior Tuahalamaka, Josh Burnham, and Bryce Young. All three of those guys have started. So we're deep. But what last season taught us is that you have to have depth.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell our players. There's the example. There's another example that we have to use for this year, right? Don't make a permanent decision based off the first game. Right, it's a long season and things happen, injuries happen. We're going to need everybody, and so we have to continuously remind our young people that hey, sometimes the greatest things in life take time. All right, yeah. So don't let the what's happening right now determine what's going to be the future.
All right, one or two more for you, Coach, before we get you out of here. You've been so gracious with your time. We're so excited to talk about the Irish. I feel like I know your team better than I know my family at times because I feel like I've spent so much time around you, and it's been a joy to cover. But you have just a remarkable amount of young players that have been thrust into the roles that you just referenced that are ready to play, and there's no drop-off. To think that you can go from Benjamin Morrison to Leonard Moore, and there's no drop-off, even though one guy's a proven All-American, the other's a true freshman, and there's no drop-off in play. What do you do differently than other places that allow your young players to step right onto the field and not skip a beat? Because it's been remarkable at several positions.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a secret. We were able to do a really good job in recruiting. You have a strong belief in the guys you recruit. Every year, you're going to find some guys that are ready to play early. Now, what I often say is that the guys like Leonard Moore, they earn the trust and belief of their coaches and teammates way before you see it in the media, right? Way before you see it on the game field. Leonard Moore, we knew Leonard Moore was a dude, right? Just because of what he's shown in practice. So how do you continuously get him in there and really game important game situations early in the season? He might not be a starter, but we're going to put him in there. We're going to roll those guys that we have confidence that can help us into the game. And then all of a sudden, when you're thrust to be a starter, right? There is no huge drop off, and I think that's important to make sure those guys that can help you win, you find ways in crucial situations to put them on the field and make sure that they gain that confidence. Because all of a sudden, when that guy becomes a starter, you're not missing a beat.
Coach, and finally, a lot's been talked about with the extension of USC and the Notre Dame rivalry and the importance of that game for so many. I think Notre Dame's in a unique situation where everyone thinks they're your rival, but I don't know if Notre Dame necessarily shares that same opinion. So I guess I just kind of want to ask you this, kind of an open-ended question. How do you personally feel about rivalry games as a guy that played college football at the highest level and a guy that's now coached at the highest level? How important are rivalry games to you? And what do you think we should do as a sport to maintain some of the traditions that we've had for a long time?
Man, I think back over my football career, right? Even in high school, I played for Huber Heights Wayne, and we played this team called the Centerville Elks, home of AJ Hawk and Kirk Herbstreit and Mike Newton, and that was the greatest rivalry there was. Like, that's what we felt like. That was the game. And then as you go in Ohio State and play Michigan, like, huge rivalry. Like, rivalries are such a great part of sports. You think of the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Celtics and the Bulls. Like, that's what makes this thing special. You throw the records out of the window, right? You throw previous experiences out the window. It's like this game means everything. And so I'm a huge proponent of rivalries. I think the Notre Dame USC rivalry is one of the greatest. I remember before I got here, memories of that game and the plays that would either lead to a championship or the playoffs or whatever the situation was, that stick out in my mind. And so I think they're great. And I think we got to find ways to continuously save some of those special college football rivalries. And I know there's some people above me that will make some of those decisions on scheduling, but it would be a disservice to get away from some of those great rivalries. And I'm a huge proponent of Notre Dame and USC continuously playing each other for endless amount of time. Like, that's a game that as the head coach, you want to play and you want to be a part of. And I hope we can get this rivalry renewed.
Well said, Coach. Always so appreciate the time. Always enjoy covering your program. You do it the right way, and we hope nothing but the best for you this upcoming season.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Enjoy a little bit of downtime. I hope to see you soon.
All right, you too, bud.
All right.
Well, great conversation there with Marcus Freeman, but now it's time to dive into some of the news and notes that have transpired here in the last week. The SEC is in the process of having their spring meetings right now, and there have been some pretty significant takeaways. It feels like we've had some headway that's been made here in the last 7 to 10 days in college football. The biggest one is the actual adoption of the straight seeding model as it pertains to the college football playoff. So if you are unaware of what's gone down, last year, the 4 bye games, the 4 teams that earned the bye, all had to be conference champions, which means Arizona State, winners of the Big 12, and Boise State, winner of the Mountain West, they were rewarded with that first round bye as a result of being a conference champ, right? We remember that, but there was a lot of pushback on that because if you look at Boise State's schedule in particular, it didn't really rival that of what Penn State had to play or what Texas had to play. So the result of losing in the Big Ten and the SEC Conference Championship game meant that you not only lost your bye, but you would actually be passed up by a team that actually won a league that wasn't quite comparable to that of the Big Ten or the SEC or even the ACC or the Big 12. So I think it's probably a matter of time that this got fixed. Plus, there was an issue last year when you take into account the fact that the 5 seed actually had a more manageable path to the national championship game than, say, I don't know, the 1 seed. That's somewhat problematic. We all looked at Penn State's path last year, and that's no disrespect to SMU or to Boise, but we looked at Penn State's path and said, all right, yep, their chances of getting to the semifinal are actually quite good, even though they lost in the Big Ten championship game to Oregon, who would then have to face Ohio State in the second round of the playoffs. So they had to fix that, and it only made sense. This will lead to a few things, all right? 1, it's going to lead to more competitive first-round matchups because if the best teams last year being Penn State and Texas. If they have that first round bye, then the competition between 5, 12, 6 and 11, 7, 10, and 8 and 9, those teams are likely going to be closer in quality, meaning that those first round games are actually going to be a little bit more competitive, which they weren't last year. And it will reward those teams that actually played a ridiculous gauntlet in the conference schedule and in their non-conference schedule. Those teams will be rewarded with higher seeds. So I think it makes perfect sense, and I think it's something that absolutely had to be adjusted. The other thing, I think it's just simple. This is the way we've been doing college football for a long time. We didn't reward conference champions with buys. It kind of simplifies the process. So now all we need to think about, all right, hey, rank 1 through 12 based on quality, and the criteria will all be factored in. It will go 1 through 12 the same way it always did. So I think we as college football consumers, we're already kind of equipped to be able to gather this information and study it. And let's also be acknowledging too, it's going to put a newfound premium on continuing to improve the strength of schedule argument. The strength of schedule argument has long been one that we've talked about here on Always College Football. I think strength of schedule should be the number one criteria, because look, if you have a team that goes 11-1 against a team that goes 9-3, and this is not using last year as an example, this is not a slight towards Indiana. They absolutely belonged, and it's certainly not me making a pitch on behalf of Miami, South Carolina, or Alabama. But if you look at the 9-3 teams from last year and some of their great wins, they were in some ways superior than a team like Boise State, who finished 11-1, 12-1, but with a conference championship. Now we'll be able to kind of seed it accordingly. So it's going to give a premium to teams that played a stronger conference, and you will be rewarded as such. And I think that is also beneficial. And let's just be real. This was kind of an unintended consequence based on how things went a few years ago, right? If you look at the 12-team model where the top 4 conference champions were rewarded, it was made a lot of sense back when we had the Pac-12 in existence. But now with consolidation that we've seen in the Big Ten and the SEC, there's no reason why the G5 representative should be rewarded with a first-round bye. Now, it worked out last year because the ACC champion didn't have the same quality as on their schedule as, say, Boise State did on theirs. But in all likelihood, now we'll be seeing a situation where, all right, the top 4 will be the top 4. Had we had the Pac-12, had we had the ACC, had we had the original Power 5 plus G5 champion, it would have made perfect sense and it would have eliminated all problems. But that's not the case. So we have to now adopt and shift. And this will make, I think things a little bit more smooth here in year number 2 of the 12-team playoff. One other thing that's also starting to gain some steam, when we look at the future of college football and where we're heading with the college football playoff format, we all are now kind of acknowledging that it feels like a 16-team playoff is an inevitability. Like, there's been speculation about maintaining 12 or maybe going to 14. But now it's almost like, guys, let's just get to where we're eventually going to go. So let's just go straight to 16. Let's stop wasting time. Let's stop trying to kind of take it a little at a time. Let's stop trying to figure out, all right, will those 2 teams get buys? Will they be Big Ten and SEC or vice versa? It doesn't matter. Like, that is just, let's just get rid of it. If anything, we learned last year that a buy isn't really all that advantageous, especially when you take into account the fact that all 4 teams that had a first round bye, they all lost in their first game of the college football playoff last year. So I think getting to 16 makes the most sense. We're now going to have more home playoff games, which I couldn't be more in favor of. You're going to be able to reward the number 1, number 2, number 3 overall seed because they'll play the 3, quote, weakest teams in the field when looking at how it's all going to structure, assuming the straight seeding model continues to be as follows. But the big point of conversation has been around, do we have automatic qualifiers, or do we go with a 5+11 model? Now, automatic qualifiers, for those that are unaware, it means that the SEC and the Big Ten, they would each get at least 4 teams in the field every single year. The Big 12 and the ACC would get at least 2 teams in the field every year. Now, remember, I said at least because there is a scenario with the 4-4-2-2-1 model, the one being the G5 champion that also makes the field. There is a scenario in which the SEC could get 6. There's a scenario in which the Big 10 could get 6. The ACC could get 3. There are scenarios in which that could happen. I think it's a little bit unlikely to assume 6. I think 5's within reason, but at least 4. So automatic qualifiers would be impactful. Now, why are automatic qualifiers becoming kind of popular amongst the Big 10? Well, partly because of a few different reasons. One, it allows flexibility, and it also allows for an increased inventory on conference championship weekend, meaning you can add 2 extra games on conference championship weekend that would serve as play-in games into the college football playoff. So your top 2 teams, they'd play in your traditional conference championship game. So last year, it would have been in the SEC, it would have been Georgia and Texas in the conference championship game. And then you would have the 3 play the 6. In last year's scenario in the SEC, it would have been Alabama against, it had been Tennessee against Ole Miss or LSU or whoever ends up being that 6th seed. And then you would have Alabama against Tennessee, South Carolina, Ole Miss, what have you. And the winner of those 2 games would actually qualify for the college football playoff, meaning the loser of those 2 play-in games would be subject to the wait on selection day. Hey, will we get in or will we won't as one of those at-large teams? So it adds inventory. It also adds a little bit more intrigue on conference championship weekend. Because let's be real, guys, in this expanded playoff, the conference championships have kind of taken a bit of a back seat. So that's going to make conference championship weekend incredible again, with gotta-have-it games for at least 8 teams in the SEC and the Big 10, and then potentially for 2 extra teams in the ACC and the Big 12. That's been a big proponent of the conversation up to this point. But now there's been a new model that's starting to be floated out there, mostly by the Southeastern Conference. It's the 5+11 model, meaning the top 5 leagues, well, the top 4 leagues plus the G5 representative, their conference champions would all make it in. And then you would have 11 other spots that would be up for at-large opportunities. So why is the SEC proposing this model, and why does it have some momentum within the SEC circle? Because the SEC right now is in the midst of a real knockdown, drag-out discussion about whether or not they want to adopt that 9th conference game. As of this moment, the SEC plays only 8 conference games, which means if you add that 9th game against a really quality opponent, then you might be subjected to having another loss. Well, if you keep it at 8, then the likelihood of you finishing the season with an extra win is higher, which means the likelihood of you getting an automatic qualifier bid, an at-large bid, would actually increase as well. That, I think, is part of the discussion. It's a leverage point for the SEC. Now, the Big 10, they are strongly opposed to the 5+11 model. Why? Because they play 9 conference games. So they're trying to dig in and say, we want the automatic qualifiers. Understandable. They play 9 conference games, so they want to guarantee at least 4 of their teams make the field every year. And the SEC says, well, if we go to a 9th conference game, then we will also support the automatic qualifiers. But at this point, that's not necessarily a guarantee. So I think this has everything to do with whether or not the SEC adds that last conference game. If they do, then you can anticipate the automatic qualifier, the 4-4-2-2-1 model being used when deciding the top 16 teams for the postseason. But if the SEC stays at 8, I could see them continuing to go all in on the 5+11 model. 5 automatic qualifiers, 11 at-large bids. The other thing I like about the possible 5+11 is that it kind of allows us to keep a little bit more of a premium on the regular season. And now, while I would look forward to those play-in games that we might get on Conference Championship Saturday, I think those would be amazing. Win or go home possibilities, do or die scenarios. I love that idea for college football. But I also know that throughout the course of our history, the 150 plus year history of college athletics, we have always put a heavy premium in college football on the regular season. Well, if we go with the at-large model, where we have 11 teams at large, that would actually encourage teams in the SEC and the ACC and in other places to continue to strengthen their schedule by adding more big non-conference games, because at that point they'd only have the 8 conference games, so they'd have one extra game to schedule on a year-to-year basis. And I love those non-conference matchups featuring marquee opponents. I think that is something that we need to really, really be paying attention to. So, like I said, summing it all up, few things at play here. Number one, will the SEC adopt the 9-game conference schedule? If they do, then you can expect the automatic qualifiers to be implemented in the 16-team playoff. If the SEC decides to remain at 8, then I would expect there being a huge, huge discussion between the Big Ten and the SEC, frankly, because they're the ones that have the most control over the future format of the college football. If the SEC stays at 8, I fully expect them to try to push the 5+11 model, 5 automatic qualifiers plus the 11 at-larges. So this will be something fascinating to keep an eye on, because it could really determine what the future of college football looks like in 2027 and beyond. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. We appreciate so much all of you that have been with us throughout the offseason. The numbers have been through the roof, especially on the podcast platform. So I encourage all of you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You can just search Always College Football. It'll automatically populate when we put out a new episode. And if you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, we greatly appreciate it. Go ahead and subscribe to that channel so you can get our episodes at the top of your feed every single week. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.